It is fabulous to have you doing the Bloomberg Valuable Conversation because you are our chairman and our very first valuable leader. So let's just start from the beginning. What is the role of business when we talk about human inclusion, and what is it that the CEOs or the business leaders need to do? What's their play?
Well, Caroline, thanks for the opportunity, and obviously thanks for what you are doing. But what is very important is that this world currently isn't functioning as well as it should. And I think we have a wonderful opportunity here with the Valuable 500 to work on some of the things that matter. The fact that we are more connected than people think, the fact that we need to strive for diversity and inclusion across the world, that with the enormous force of business, that what business represents in society, it perhaps can drive these higher moral values at a time that the politicians seem to have a hard time doing that. And then the role of the valuable leader, which has to obviously start with the tone of the top, is the CEOs that we are talking about and targeting specifically, that they are internalizing that, not only intellectually, but also emotionally with the heart. And the organization will notice if that is the case or not. So what we're talking here about is the basic human values on which society should function, and we should always fight for that.
So one of the statistics that we learned with our EY research is 7% of our C-suite have a disability, yet 4 out of 5 of them are hiding it, right. Okay? And yet you stood up. So I want to know, why don't you think leaders are coming out of the closet about their disability, and why did you stand up? Because you do so much. You do so much. So
well,
why?
It's not so much. I do the same thing, which is to defend the basic human values on which society is based. If we don't live in a world where there is dignity and respect for everybody, where there is equity, equal opportunities for everybody, and where there is a sense of compassion, that we can put ourselves in the shoes of others so that we can understand what others really want to create this inclusive society. If we lose these basic human values, we lose humanity. So when politicians speak out against an LGBT community or make racial comments, or any of the other basic values that underpin this, we actually destroy the fabric of society. And here again, if you look at disability, which affects 1.3 billion people, which is 15% of the world population, we haven't given it that attention. And if you look at the statistics of exclusion in any part of the world, not just in the developing markets, in any part of the world, then we have a job to do to create that dignity and respect.
And well, one of the things is that really infuriates me is like 90% of companies say they're committed to diversity and inclusion, and yet only 4% of them consider disability. I think it's because they just don't see that the business benefit or the brand benefit. So do you think there is an opportunity for those brands or leaders who really embrace disability inclusion before anybody else? Like, what do you think that opportunity might be?
Well, it's very clear, over and over proven again, with any statistic now coming out of our ears, that a more diverse organization, and that goes well beyond race and gender, a more diverse organization, day in, day out, outperforms other organizations quite significantly. I've seen it with my own organization I was leading at that time. So the evidence financially is overwhelming on the top line growth, on the profitability, on the shareholder return. And interestingly, more and more shareholders are actually picking companies, investing in companies on the basis of their culture, their diversity. It might be gender or race at this point in time, but increasingly disability getting on the radar screen as well. So the financial case is overwhelming. Why do we not see the traction that we really want?
Yeah.
At government level, at private sector level, I think it's permeates the whole society, is that we need to overcome some perceived mindsets. Yeah. People think it's a cost issue, it's a absentee issue, it's less motivation, or reputational issues. And any of these myths, it's actually the opposite. If you have people with disabilities in your organization, they create an enormous loyalty amongst other employees as well, less turnover. Their costs are negligible over and over, if not any. Their absenteeism or their rate of leaving is actually less than others. Their productivity is higher.
And the customer value is 8 trillion globally, right?
And then you have the enormous market, that is absolutely right, where you have an 8 trillion consumer market. So it is kind of strange that you have more offerings of clothes for cats and dogs than you have for people with disabilities.
And so like, my thing, Paul, is why are we not seeing this accelerated traction? why, when we look at this, there's a case already made. And remember when years ago you became the CEO for sustainability and everybody thought that you were crazy. Yeah. Now I'm the crazy one trying to get 500 CEOs around the world to put disability or elevate it to board conversation. What do you think the obstacle is for that?
See, it's okay. Any change effort of this magnitude starts with cynicism or skepticism, then rejection, then some resistance, craziness, but ultimately you'll get to that tipping point. I believe in this case we're very close to that tipping point. We've done it on LGBT, we've done it on gender, and still there are lots of things to do in those areas as well. We're getting to that now with disability. I'm not so disappointed. We see more and more companies, from the Starbucks having stores with sign language, to IKEA designing furniture for people with disability, to a brand like Walls employing enormous amounts of people with disability, to many of the others I could mention. And these companies are successful. And there is nothing better for business than showing business success out of what you do to attract the others. That's happening on the environmental front, that's happening with gender equality, and that is also starting to happen with the disability, and your efforts will only help accelerate that. So I'm actually starting from a positive mindset here.
Yeah, well, we're both optimists. So we launched the Valuable 500 in Davos this year, the World Economic Forum. We made history. So we had 5 leaders on that stage. Okay, so what would you say to any leader right now about why it's important to join the Valuable 500? I mean, it's an opportunity for brand differentiation. It's an opportunity for next generation talent and acquisition. But what would you say to them? Your peers, what are you going to say to them?
Well, first you have to say to them, it's not really so much other than an enormous moral commitment that you believe in the rights and opportunities for everybody. How can you run a company in today's world where you have a mindset that you would treat different people differently? Your organization would notice that if that were the case, be it gender, be it sexual orientation, be it race, but also be it disability. So if you want to live in a less inclusive society, if you want to drive people apart versus bringing them together, you probably aren't worth being a CEO. What we're asking here about is a very simple thing, is to discuss it at board level, to commit to some specific actions, and to help in some areas of promoting it. It's a very, a light commitment at this point in time, but it will be enormously welcomed by the employees. But people want to work for companies that are inclusive, and companies that are inclusive do better.
But I think the thing is, what we need to say, this is leaders make choices, and those choices create cultures, and therefore this conversation needs to be elevated. It's not that the CEO has to do the work, but at least release the resources within the organization, right?
The beauty is, it's not a choice of do I not like disability or not, or gender. It's a choice of what are the human values that make this world function. Yeah. Do we want to live in an inclusive society? Do we want the respect and dignity for everybody? It's actually not a choice. The people that don't make that choice, I don't think will be long in their jobs, whatever their jobs are.
Well, look, I just want to wrap up with, you are the chair of the Advisory Council for One Young World, and you're on the board for Global Compact for the UN.
Yes.
Now, we're looking at the Sustainable Development Goals, something very close to One Young World and obviously Global Compact. We're not going to be able to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals if disability is not really understood. And what is your suggestion about how business can engage around the Sustainable Development Goals and disability?
Yeah. Well, as you probably know, I think it was in 2006 that the UN signed the Convention for the Rights of People with Disabilities. 177 countries signed that. It took effect as of 2008. Countries have to report on that. And the UN Global Compact, which I happen to be the co-chair of, then issued a business guide on how to integrate that into the 10 principles, and the businesses have to report on that as well. So I think with the added attention and focus that we bring, we see some momentum. But your question is right. We are finding that we are behind on most of the areas of the Sustainable Development Goals. The Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 goals, which basically have as overall objective to leave nobody behind, fortunately has at least 11 references to people with disabilities, be it in accessible cities, be it access to education, and many of the other areas. Some people have lobbied, because I was part of the high-level panel making these Sustainable Development Goals, to have a separate goal for people with disabilities, but we thought it is better to integrate it in all of the other goals, and I think it's well represented. So now we just need to put it to practice. Increasingly, you see companies understanding the power of the Sustainable Development Goals, the enormous economic opportunity that lies in it, and you see it in many of these areas, from moving to green energy, to providing education, to fixing our food chain. It's also creating a more inclusive society. So it's the economic benefits, the longer we wait, that actually go up. And the moral ground is actually becoming increasingly clear as well. So here again, I think it's a great guideline that we can use. As far as One Young World is concerned, we have obviously the future leaders there. It's the Davos for the young.
That's where we launched the Valuable 500. That's where we got the traction.
100% right. And it's these people that are the change makers in the companies. And what you clearly find is in society is when we grew up, we probably weren't exposed as much to people with disabilities. Now the people with disabilities are integrated in education and many other things. And the concept of unity, of purpose amongst the young generation is slightly different than it was amongst ours. And you see that they have less of a, call it unconscious biasness towards this. So I'm actually very positive, and you saw that energy coming up.
It was amazing.
And these people all standing up and saying, I'm going back to my companies, I want to sign up. And many of the 300 companies that have now signed up because it was these young people in One Young World that went to their management and say, for what company am I working? Am I working for an inclusive company? Or am I working for an exclusive club? And how long is that going to last?
So I have to ask the last cheeky question. So you're kind of considered as the good CEO. I mean, you were always the good leader who does everything good. You're the one who's involved in everything. There's always a handful of you, really human, purpose-driven leaders. And when we've been talking about the Valuable 500 and the leaders, some of the pushback I'm getting is, but do you know who our CEO is? And my response is, your CEO is a human. And I guess I want to really know, why were you the very first CEO in the world to stand with and for disability?
Well, I don't know if I was the first one. There are many others. But in all fairness, there are many other companies like the Microsofts in as well.
They were companies, Paul, but they weren't CEOs.
No, but a lot of their plans and what they did was because there were people behind that, and some might be CEOs. I honestly believe that you have to fight for the people that are left behind. I honestly believe that we have to bring humanity back into business and put it in the center. I honestly believe that to be a good CEO, you first and foremost have to be a good human being. And that starts with fighting for the ones that are left behind. I'm very fortunate to belong to only 2% of the world population that was born in a country where you didn't have to pay for education, where I had a piece of bar soap, so I had my sanitation, my toilet. I didn't have to deal with stunting because I had my food. Unfortunately, that's still not the case for 98% of the world's population. And if you belong to the lucky and have won your lottery ticket of life, then it's your duty to put yourself to the service of others. And that is the essence of the Sustainable Development Goals, to not leave anybody behind. And here you have a group of 1.3 billion people, bigger than any other community actually. Many of the other communities have been addressed and have gotten higher on the agenda. And for some reason or another, this was the forgotten part of society. And you're doing a wonderful job to bring that to the foreground again, and it deserves all of our attention, but it also, above all, deserves all of our support and commitment.
So we're going to be back at Davos 2020 with 500 signatures. Deal?
That is the minimum, the valuable 500, and you know what 500. I'm going to say. And then we multiply it by 10. But it's first important to get the top companies, which you're doing. And I'm already so pleased that in a relatively short period of time, 300 companies have signed up. And many smaller companies in their value chains are starting to gear up as well. But we need 500 of the biggest companies. That's how you get a tipping point. Yeah. That's how you change the world. That's how we can all say we left this world in a little bit better place than we found it. And that's a life with purpose.